All right, so I'm going to call upon the stage our next speaker, Patti Durand, based in Humboldt, Saskatchewan. Patti is a strategic action planner, speaker, and author of Brightrack Consulting, bringing skills honed in agriculture and small business advising within finance in the private sector. Born and raised in Toulon, Manitoba, Patti holds a bachelor's in agriculture from University of Manitoba and is a certified family enterprise advisor and professional neurologist. Please give me a round of applause for Patti. Thank you.
So while everybody's filing in, I see a few people up there. If you would be so kind to go to Slido and log in, I'll be asking you some questions that you can weigh in as we're talking. Give everybody a chance to file out and file in. So what you'll see when you log into the Slido is that there's an opportunity to submit questions. And then when you see other people's questions, you can vote them up or down. If there's a question, hey, I want to know that too, you can go ahead and put a check mark beside it. For anybody coming in, just go ahead and take a picture of the Slido so you can join the conversation during the presentation. And don't be shy, you can come and grab a seat too. So it's 11 o'clock. Ooh, my voice is loud. Nobody has ever called me quiet. Good morning, everybody. My name is Patti Durand, and I'm really excited to be here. I have had the pleasure of working with hundreds of farm families over the most recent 6 or 7 years of my career in particular, talking about decision-making, talking about forward thinking, talking about the unknowns and the discomfort that comes with it in terms of farm transition. And so I think about this visual as far as many families and members of families feel like they are kind of sitting in the middle of this field, this vast field, not sure which way to go, not sure which direction to head, not sure what the right choices are, what the possibilities are, and it can be overwhelming. And so as the title of the presentation, Start Where You Are, the things we're going to be talking about today, if you came to hear about structure, if you came to hear about numbers, if you came to hear about the mechanisms, I'm probably going to disappoint you. But what we will talk about is the impact of mindset, the impact of assumptions and beliefs and things that I know to be true and helpful for farm families when they're trying to make decisions. What actually allows them to take action? And I'll tell you how I got there. So, the first weigh-in, I want to get a bit of a sense of the audience and people's perspectives. So if you can go on your phone, go to the Slido, the QR code is there. What is one word that describes how you feel about farm or transition planning? Fun. I don't know where the fun person is. Good for you. So as you see, when people feel a common vote, it enlarges the word, and so it gives me a sense of what everybody's, the majority of the room is feeling. And so this is what I have encountered. What you are telling me is reflected in so many of the farm kitchen tables that I've been at. The worry, the uncertainty, and the hesitation that goes with it. People are feeling overwhelmed. It is complex. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of nuances. There's a lot of education. There's a lot of previous bad experiences. And what happens is that people end up kind of tripping on them, which can be really difficult and cause people to actually not do anything. It results in paralysis. They don't know what to do, so nothing becomes the answer. So I'm here to tell you that this is normal. I'm really excited about the exciting and happy, good, that there needs to be advice, that it can be changed, but it can be fun. I'm going to tell you all of these things can be true, and ways that you can overcome some of the uncertainty and challenges to actually pursue a path that is meaningful for both you and your family, and how your business might serve that. So a couple months ago, my younger daughter, who's in her early 20s, was listening to some of the material and messages that I was working on. And she said, "Mom, this is your superpower. Like, wow, you just know how to say it, and you know how to do this, and it's really helpful." And I'm like, hold on. Certainly, it is a muscle that I've built. It is something that I have practiced deeply. I have studied deeply. I have learned from every farm family that I have the opportunity to sit down with. But it's not a superpower. And so when you hear me speaking today and you think, man, she does it, it looks so easy. It looks so easy to be positive, and she has the language that goes with it. Please know that this is something that I learned. And therefore you can learn as well. And so simultaneously, I feel like in the industry, there seems to be a craving for certainty about the way. What is the perfect way to transition? How are we going to do this in the best way possible? And I personally feel that there is no one way. There is the best way that will be suitable for your particular operation and family, and it's up to you to be able to describe that in terms of what you want the outcomes to look like. So anything I suggest today, I will encourage you. You can take it, you can leave it, you can modify it. This is for you. This is not a directive, you must. This is a what if. Could you think about it this way? What would the possibilities be if you did just that? In 2018, I was lucky enough to be asked to be part of a project, and I had a role in which we were trying to decipher what was it about farm transition and succession that was continuing to be a challenge for Canadian farm families. And being asked to do that was this incredible opportunity. We dug into it and we were reflecting on things. In part of the research I did, speaking with Merle Good, who's been a succession planner out of Alberta, I asked him, I said, when was the first program that you were part of in transition that was serving farm families? He stopped for a minute and he said, 1972. I'm like, oh my gosh. So how is it that this has been a problem for so long and it continues to be? I know farm families and farmers are incredibly good at adopting good ideas. When you see something such as drone spray application and it works and it makes sense, you grab onto it and you do it. So what is it about farm transition that doesn't seem to align with that? What's missing? And so since that time, I have been a student of this. What is helpful? And as part of that, many, many, many whiteboards, dry erase boards have been filled. This one, and 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 there will be many more to come. That's a little sidebar. It's one of my favorite tools for family conversations. If you have an opportunity to get a whiteboard and have it in your kitchen or your farm office or your shop and use it to capture conversations and get down notes, if it's to-dos or who's doing what or unpacking thoughts, it's incredibly powerful. It is a public way to summarize all these possibilities and get it all in one place so people can say, yeah, actually that's not what I meant, and clarify it. So again, sidebar. So as we were originally talking about what is it that's holding back Canadian farms, we had some theories. We said, well, maybe it's farms that are too small to get the attention of providers. They're just not a big enough operation. They're the ones that are probably having the hardest time. Or what if it's because they don't have enough money to invest in the services they need in order to make some of the big decisions or get the support? So maybe that's what's holding them back. Or maybe it's the people that are like living in the middle of nowhere and too far from a large center where a lot of the services exist. And I'll tell you, we were wrong. But one of the things that did happen is that patterns started to emerge. So after starting with all of these theories, we went to the field, and I was lucky enough in a 5-year period to personally sit down with over 350 farm families, primarily in the prairies, but Canada-wide, there was from coast to coast. And they taught me a lot. And they showed me a lot of patterns and recurring things. And what also happened is as I was listening to these conversations, I was like, why do people behave this way? Why do they talk to each other like that? What is going on? They say they want this to happen, and yet they're holding back. They're not making decisions, they're resistant, they're rude, they're hurtful, or just paralyzed. And so, in addition to spending time with families, I have, and being a student of this, I have dug deep into the human psychology and the behavioral studies. We happen to live in a pretty incredible time in terms of understanding human behavior, and so I've really tried to pull some of those things together. What helps us take action? What helps us have more fruitful conversations? And simultaneously, what might hold us back from that? So these patterns get woven together, and the farm families offered me this information. And that's kind of what I want to share with you today. So what did they offer? Number one, these are universal issues. This does not play favorites. It doesn't matter how big your farm is, how small your farm is, how wealthy your farm is, if you're in debt up to your eyeballs, if you are in the middle of nowhere or right beside a city, this does not play favorites. Now, what does that mean? It means that if you feel like you're alone, if you feel like something is broken, if you're wondering like, what the heck are we doing wrong? It's totally normal. These are complex things that are the intersection of family history, behavior, baggage, dollar signs, legacy, guilt, expectations that tend to be unspoken. And so, lo and behold, as we continue to sit at these tables, it's universal, but there are some consistent ways that are helpful, and that's what I want to put in your hands. So, these are ideas that I would say would help you get at least closer to the target. My challenge to you is that to build this general target of what you're aiming for, it might not be a bullseye. It doesn't have to be. Don't let something that is pretty darn good be the enemy of perfection. Meaning, if you're aiming for such perfection, but you're holding back some pretty good stuff from happening, just pause and say, hey, you know what, maybe this isn't serving us. One of the other byproducts that we're going to get to, and I'm going to refer to a couple times today, is that one of the patterns that emerged was that successors in these family conversations are craving direction, so much so that they are looking for resources and they weren't finding it. And so I actually just released a book called The Future Leader, The Successor's Guide to Family Business Leadership, that literally addresses right that. So we are going to talk on a couple concepts today that are in the book, but for this audience, because I knew it was going to be broad in terms of your different roles, I wanted to give a more general presentation, but we'll refer to it a couple times. My goal in that book is to hold successors capable. They are ready, they are eager, they are excited, and they're craving direction. And leadership development is something that I know that they're capable of. So, what are the things that are helpful? The absolute critical first ingredient in succession, which may sound kind of fluffy, but I'm going to tell you what it is hope. You need to personally believe that you can do this. And here's why you may not. Unfortunately, in our marketplace, in order to monetize advisory services, accounting, law, financial services, insurance services, and this is not finding fault with those individuals. They are professionals that have been doing their best. But a mechanism of selling what they do is fear. If you don't hire us, if you don't do this planning, if you don't sign up and get going on this, it could cost you your farm. It could cost you your relationships. It could cost you here's a good one. You're going to pay a lot of taxes. So, fair enough. You want to use fear as a motivator to light a fire and get people going. But here's the latest research in human psychology. Just like the ugly pictures on cigarette packets have a purpose, but actually really aren't helping people to make better choices, fear about transition actually has a directly opposite effect. When you tell someone the negative possible outcomes of not planning, it actually results in paralysis. And so, at the end of the day, this is not making a difference. This is not inspiring action. This is not doing anything other than creating paralysis. So then, number one, you have to believe that you and your family can do this. I promise you that you guys have done hard things before. If you reflect in your mind of the various things that you have overcome, whether it was crop failure, drought, challenges with family, labor shortages, marketing challenges, fill in the blank, whatever that is, I don't know if I know a better industry for figuring stuff out. You're really good at it. Why would this be any different? I'm telling you, you can do this. In fact, nobody can do this except for you. Nobody cares about your farm and family like you do. I'm a pretty caring person. I don't care about it like you do. It's yours. You need to drive this bus. I can't encourage you enough to do so. What does that look like? Well, you just got to start. And I put just start. It's not a directive in terms of you have to forcing you to do so, but rather saying this is your opportunity. Stephen Covey says, begin with the end in mind. The best day to start planning for the exit from your business is the day that you start. The next best day is today. If you have not started in transition planning, do it. People wonder, what indicates that I'm in transition? If you are in business, you are in transition. That's how the world works. Change is constant. There's always an evolution. And the opportunity to get going. Now, what does get going mean? It means start thinking, what is my desired future? What do I want this to look like? What could it look like? Or talk into your family. What are they hoping for? What is their wish list? What do they imagine will happen? And then bringing it to your advisors and saying, hey, we're thinking about this possibility. Let's talk about that. In turn, when you start, what happens is that the earlier you start, the more lanes you have to pick from. Too often, when we leave things until the last minute, our choices get narrowed. So for example, if you had the opportunity to seed on the 1st of May, think about all of the different crops you can pick from. When you come to June 15th, all of a sudden that gets narrowed right down. It's not our preference. We don't like it like that. We want to have options. We want to have lanes to pick from. We want to have possibilities. So the sooner that you can start, and I want to be clear, I don't want to discourage if you haven't started yet. Wherever you are, get going. It's your opportunity. The sooner you have the sooner you start, the more choices that you have, and as a result, it means you're not railroaded. It means you're not forced. Or if you recognize there's going to be a roadblock, you can plan more adequately. So, walking into rooms, a very common question that people would start with is, just tell me the way. Just, like, as though I'm like hiding it from them. It's like I'm just keeping it a secret, and if you are really nice to me, I will reveal it. Yeah, no, that's not how this works. So I will say, if you go to your advisor and say, make me a transition plan, it is the equivalent of picking up your iPhone and saying, Siri, tell me where to go. If you don't know what the destination is going to be, how you get there kind of doesn't matter. So your ability to describe the end outcome in as clear detail as you can, saying, we know these many people are going to be involved, or we know that we want to have this enterprise, or we want to do this expansion. Whatever those factors are, you get to describe it, and then your advisor can start to inform the best mechanism to get there. On that path, you can then be open to find what will serve your business and help your business serve your family. So this is actually really important. When you start to verbalize what you're aiming for, all of a sudden you see possibilities everywhere. When you've named that target, and maybe it's not a bullseye, but the big target, all of a sudden they just become clear to you in terms of, oh, well, maybe we could do that. Or here's another possibility. That also comes with the fruitfulness of the conversations that come with it. How many people feel like this with succession? Okay, so this is your mind, and you're trying to think about all the different possibilities and all the different nuances of balance and reasonability and sustainability and what's possible, and what it does is it just becomes this knot in your brain. And that sensation is really challenging. What I came to appreciate in talking to farm families is that, lo and behold, many of the family members are actually feeling the same way. They have their own version of this knot in their brain, but they're not talking to each other about it. Somehow they think they're all thinking the same thing. They don't have a conversation. I've sitting across from people, yeah, this is what my kids want. Really? How do you know that? Oh, I just know. Have you asked them? No. Asking is an incredibly revealing thing and can be really helpful. It requires communication to understand that expectation. And I'll share something that kind of make a comment on. When we think about what it is the other person wants, if you ask, what does your family member want? The response might be, no, I'm not really clear on what the other person expects. Even more damaging is that your family is likely to tell you when their unspoken expectations haven't been met, often in an unkind or judgmental way. It means that families often have an unwritten rule book stating that when people fall short, even when they're genuinely trying their best to perform and achieve, backlash is to be expected as a result. Here's the kicker. We expect a lot, but we don't tell you what we expect. So I'm going to offer we can do better. And that's the next question I'd like you to weigh in on. How often do you have farm family meetings? Thanks for whoever found the humor. I appreciate it. So, there's a common belief, and people accept, yes, we should be talking. And so there's attempts that are made, and a few meetings, or once in a while, never is quite common. Ultimately, when there are families that are feeling they should have a meeting, but they've never done it before, what happens is they're just happy to get everybody in the same room. But they haven't made an agenda. There isn't a clear purpose for the meeting. And there's a lot of stuff that hasn't been talked about for the past 20 years. And so it turns into this big dumping ground of awkwardness. And people are like, we're never doing that again. That is not going to happen. There's a few things that can be kind of helpful. And thinking about family meetings, number one, good job you're having them. I'm going to encourage you that it's going to take more. So something to keep in mind, and I like this, I mean, it's an AI image, I guess, but it's this image that kind of displays that the contribution over time, when there's more than one spout that's feeding into it, can be really fruitful. And so, in my experience, families that are having smaller topic meetings on a regular basis is actually really helpful. So, to begin with, honestly, have a meeting about meetings. How often should we meet? What are we going to talk about? What are the outcomes that we want? And that slow progression over time of meeting about role clarity, who's doing what when, of desired future state, of what's the current state of the union? Does everybody have a really level understanding of where we're at and therefore what's possible? If you can continually do that, it makes a big difference. And so ultimately, transition planning benefits from many conversations over time. The other thing that happens in this example is that the parents often, mom usually is the instigator, says, we're going to have a family meeting, here's what this is going to look like. And there is a desire to get decisions made, but it is unclear, and it isn't clear about who's invited to the table. Okay, I'm till noon, right? No? Okay. Sorry, we're just getting a time check here, forgive me. Communication's so important, isn't it? Okay, so transition planning requires many conversations over time. And so just know that when you make an agenda, that when you're thinking about pulling everybody together, that it can be really important. And I'll leave it at that. Something about those meetings, though. Once upon a time, there was clarity and quietness in our households because there was one screen. And it was only turned on occasionally. It was not on all the time, that noise in the background. But over time, we have added and added and added and added and added. Imagine how many screens are in this room right now. On our wrist, in our pocket, in our bag. The tech center back there is like a whole command center. We have a level of information being feeded into our brains at a pace that is just overwhelming. I'm going to tell you that you talk about this topic and transition and being complex and being complicated. If you are not created undivided time to be able to talk about it, it gets really difficult. And so ultimately, transition planning requires undivided focus of everybody around the table. And I would say it's not even just muting this stuff, it's literally getting rid of it. If you can create an isolated place to dig into this deeply and to say, actually hear each other and ask some questions and be clear about what it is that we're hoping for, the difference is incredible. It makes a really big impact, and I really want to encourage you to do that. You can't have the heavy brain work without undivided focus. So find it. Who should be involved in transition discussions? So this is something that I will say is a universal question, and they're asking my advice. Well, who should be there? Should the in-laws be there? Should the kids be there? Should the farmers be there? Should the non-farmers be there? Et cetera, et cetera. So, certainly easy to say. I would say there's no one way. You know your family best in terms of who would be best at this table. But I have two thoughts that I would encourage you to think about. In the first round of thinking about the future, it really makes sense to have the active farmers in the room. The people who are working on the farm, the family members that are directly connected with it. So that's number one. But then, when some of those decisions and clarity of expectations have been laid out, to pull in the people that feel like owners is really thoughtful. Now, easily said, can be hard to do in terms of expectations, but ultimately, the people who feel like owners, they might own a bit of property or equipment. They maybe just share the same last name as the owners, but they feel like it's theirs. This is my farm. I grew up there. Or the people that are going to eventually be heirs. I promise you that they are paying attention, and if you don't tell them what is actually happening, they will make it up. So that opportunity to truth and level set understanding can be really important. This being said, this is complicated. And I've certainly had people say, well, my family doesn't even want to come to the table. They don't want to even talk about it. Or, well, I'll try to get them interested, but I can't make them care. I will offer that at different life stages, sometimes they don't understand the impact. They're not thinking about it in the long-term way. But if you can keep the door open, it can be really helpful to say, you know what, we want to tell you the story, we want to talk about this, know that our door is open to hear more. This is an area that I've spent a lot of time because I found it common that families didn't actually know how to say these things. They feel anxious about the outcome or the feedback, and so they don't say it at all. They stop from even delivering. And so if you go to thefutureleader.ca/scripts, I have literally written out scripts for difficult conversations. And sometimes it's about the language that allows them to say things without being hurtful. So an example of some phrasing, not that there's one way to say it, but here's how you might say it. So for a successor talking to their parent. I know you aren't ready to talk about succession yet, but I'm building my career, and it's uncomfortable not knowing where this path is leading. Please know this is important to me, and that I'll be ready to talk about it when you are. So that act of leaving the door open, it's not about pressuring or focusing, or forcing, but instead saying, hey, I would like to learn more. So we live in a time with a ton of choices. And earlier I talked about how much nicer it is to have a whole bunch of choices when you're looking down the path and when you're starting early. That being said, human psychology says that, and research that it reflects, that too many choices is also vulnerable to paralysis and not making any choice. So, as a general rule, when you have a whole bunch of choices, you're working as a family, you're working as a group, you're having conversations about what you're hoping for, narrow it down. Rather than leaving the entire buffet, whenever you can narrow it down to 2 options, the 2 best options that are closest to the target you're trying to achieve is really effective. And honestly, that goes for, when you're grocery shopping, what to make for supper. It's a pretty good human life hack about how to narrow things down. The other thing is when you get to those 2, and they're basically negligible, they're just as good as each other. If you're stuck on something, but you still need to move forward, that action's important. Literally flip a coin. Just pick one. What happens is that we're so afraid of making the wrong choice, but what we neglect to realize is most often, if we start to make a choice, it's not very often that you can't back out and take a different lane if you realize maybe it wasn't optimal afterwards, or after all, So just thinking about those things and those little tips and tricks can really make a big difference. That being said, you're making choices all the time. It's not easy. And so it makes me think of this saying. Courage is knowing it might hurt and doing it anyway. Stupidity is the same. And that's why life is hard. We're all doing our best, but doing our best, doing is an action, doing is a verb. We're moving forward, we're taking action, we're making efforts to learn, and that's why this next one is so important. The other really helpful thing in transition planning and in these conversations is flexibility. If you are open to learning and shifting, it will change the way this happens. I have a farmer story that comes to mind. This long time kind of gruff rancher guy, and his daughter, adult daughter, said, You are immovable. And he was so proud of himself. I'm like, I don't think that's a compliment, actually. But there is a pride in steadfastness, in consistency. And that's great, except for when it isn't. And so the way that I think about it is that there's an opportunity to have strong opinions loosely held. And not unlike the story that I just told you. We started with these beliefs, we realized they were no longer true, and we sought education and experience and other information so that we could get to a better place. And so that opportunity to have some flexibility along the way, to recognize that maybe the way we've always done it isn't the way we need to do it now. What's the saying? What got you here won't get you there. So being open to those possibilities makes a huge difference. And don't underestimate that everyone around the table can learn. We have this beautiful brain of ours that has proven in research that we are neuroplastic our entire life. We can learn from the day we're born until the day we die. Don't miss that opportunity. So where I began, just start. It's about movement. It's about taking action. It's about recognizing what you're missing and going after it. Sometimes that involves professionals or help along the way, but it really does need to start with your family and working towards conversations that will get you there. Because then when you think about this big abandoned or vast field, instead of being overwhelming, it's a field of opportunity. It's a horizon of possibility. And it's after you, or up to you, to go after that and pursue it. And after spending so much time with family businesses, I promise you that number one, I know you can do it. And number two, I'm going to be cheering you on every step of the way. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hey, thank you, Patti, for such a thought-provoking conversation. I think we have lots of time for a few questions if the audience has.
And they've been submitting them, actually.
Yeah. But in addition, if there are some last-minute questions, we are open and we have time for that.
Sure, go ahead.
Anybody has any question?
Yeah, he's here.
Around the fifth point you made?
Yes.
And when you ask your family for their ideas,
yes,
how long do you allow them to provide those ideas? Because I asked 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And I had to revisit. I said, hey, have you looked at that letter? I say, oh, can you send it again?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You're not wrong.
I said over a year that time.
Yes.
And I never got anything back.
Completely.
Yeah.
So I think you highlight a good thing. You cannot force people to respond. There's nothing you can do, which is why I talk about keeping the door open, right? So this is an opportunity. I'm not giving you authority over the future. Like ultimately, this is my estate or farm or enterprise.
Ultimately, it was my decision.
Ultimately, it's your decision. But that's actually something. So in the scripts, one of the scripts is talking to your heirs in terms of what do you expect for your inheritance. Not that I'm giving you authority over it, but I care to hear what you think. Because if you have special things that are meaningful to you, I'd like to try to acknowledge that in my plan. If they are not stepping up, you can certainly say that. Say, I've asked you for input, and kind of give a deadline. Say, you know what, I need you to speak up at this point because some major decisions are being made. That being said, in my experience, what I feel is reflected is it is often impacted by life stage. They're busy. Yeah. It's not in their mind. And so, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, you can keep the door open. I think that's actually part of the advantage of talking about it from a very young age, And what my daughters, I'll tell you, they're in their early 20s, and they're like, Mom, do we have to talk about life insurance? I'm like, yes. I'm like, I am not sending you into this world not understanding this. This is not gonna happen. But again, we can only open the door, but the change in life stage, I will tell you, this conversation is spurred by the birth of children, notoriously. Now, that may not be your situation, but if I had $1 for like every baby I've held as I've been leading families through conversations, it's when people think forward, it's when they're precipitated. So I would encourage you, if you go to see those scripts, it might have some language that might be helpful. Yeah? Good. You can't make them. Perhaps. And you can say that. Say, here was my expectation, and you did not respond, so your lack of response is your answer. As disappointing as that may be. So I'm going to keep going if that's okay. We can continue talking. The conversation's not over. Why does it seem that women keep pushing the conversation, both matriarchs and young wives? It's a great question. I would offer that those are the caregivers. They are the ones that are in charge of family harmony most often, or feel that requirement and desire the relationships. Again, that's a huge general statement, but it's not uncommon. This is not okay. We are not going to live like this. This is not comfortable for me nor anybody else. It's not fruitful. We're going to move forward. And so I'm proud of them. Whoever's starting the conversation. Go ahead.
So that means that transfer responsibility onto the rest of the world. So it goes back to people when they count the lawyer.
Yes. So how do you transfer that leadership of conversation to the rest of the group? That is part of where the consistent communication over time happens. But understanding where their interests lie, and if their interest certainly doesn't lie, it's like, listen, this is going to be something you're going to need to manage in the future, and I would prefer that I have an opportunity to mentor you to do that. If you don't wish to be involved, like, you're making your choice, but it's going to be a bag of cats you're going to inherit if you're not familiar. So it's tricky, because the desire is not to threaten, but it's to find that language of like, listen, I need some help here. It is complicated because lives are busy, and we want our kids to have that opportunity, but simultaneously, there's a lot to reveal. And I'll tell you, this is some of the messaging you're talking about is literally what I wrote about, in terms of, because the messaging that parents are trying to tell their children, the kids aren't hearing it, because it feels accusatory, or it feels judgmental, or it feels kind of like a parental rule. And I'm like, no. Like, for example, as a successor, you will be a cost to this business for quite some time. You're not special. Sorry, I'm not insulting them, but saying, like, listen, we want to train you, but this is expensive. We are making sacrifices to make this happen. Please understand that the value you generate matters, and your care matters. For a parent to say that to a child, there's a barrier there, which is part of why I want to try to equip them differently and just be another voice that is hopefully echoing some of the things that you want to get across.
We got one more question up here.
Go ahead.
Your statements are very enlightening. In our case, we have mixed family, 2 kids on my side, 2 kids on the other side, grandkids.
Yes.
Some professional jobs, some not so professional jobs. Can you just elaborate a little more? How do you talk to your kids when it's so diverse, and they're just so spread apart, and the interests are so different? Like, how do you bring them to the table and come to some sort of consensus?
Great question. I don't think that there's like a secret formula, but there will be the one that's best for you. And so what comes to mind, I think you said it well, that when there's different backgrounds, the goal is to level set information. And so, forgive me, are some farming and some aren't? That's true. So that's where I talked about the people that are going to have to live with this and implement it. It makes sense that they would be part of the initial conversation, and that they're going to be having some responsibility for that, and then informing the rest about that mechanism. And to understand that there is significant value involved that is not cash. And if that dollar value is perceived as cash that you're trying to balance, it's highly unlikely to happen very easily. That the farming child is signing up for this opportunity, needs access to these resources, and is also taken on a bucket of risk. If you can talk that through to level set that understanding, because I think you're right. I think there's going to be too much information for some audiences within the family, and thinking about that and giving them space to ask questions that's appropriate for their level of knowledge makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I keep referring back, but it's literally like that's where the scripting comes from, because I recognize, I'm like, as parents, you have never done this before. It makes sense that it's feeling uncomfortable and you're not sure what to do, and also that you're sensitive to doing damage. And so if you can have an approach that thinks about who needs to know what, and can we level set that information, I'll be honest, what you just described, it takes a long time and it takes a lot of work. It's thoughtful, caring, compassionate work. And it requires a bucket of grace too, because we're gonna misstep at times. But I think what you just described is distinct in its complexity and important to acknowledge. We can keep going?
Yeah, I think we have a few more minutes
Okay.
if you have more questions to take.
For sure. How do you make it into a transition? No, how do you make it to a transition where you know you're doing it the right way, making them feel like they aren't getting pushed out? Great question. So I'm going to paraphrase that this is, how can we honor the senior generation and still take the lead? How can we do both of those things simultaneously? And I think one of the most important things that comes to mind is them being able to clearly paint what their desire is. The language around retirement is like super chit chat, like you meet up at the curling rink, hey, when are you gonna retire? And it's like triggering. Like people are like, I have no intention of retiring, bugger off, right? So that's okay. Your future desire within your family is your job. I really think about transition planning as a needs analysis. What do you need? What do you need? What do you need? Can the business handle it? And so therefore, it's each of our own individual responsibilities to clearly say that. This is what I need from this. This is what I desire. I want to be able to drive a combine every fall for as long as I want. Perfect. We will make that happen. But parents' desire to transition may be contradicted by their behavior. They can have a genuine intention, but it's hard. And so when you recognize that and they're getting their back up and they're resisting change, in that moment of emotion probably isn't the time to dig into it. But if you come back to them later on and say, you responded really strongly the other day, what's going on? And they can have their own, most people, there'll be some story or some specific word or something that was perhaps upsetting. But as I said in that script, I'm ready to do this. I can't do this without you. Let me know when you're ready. So keep opening that door, knowing that you probably have to make choices at some point. So both of those things are true. You want to be open and gracious, but you got to get on with what you're doing in your life. And so that, navigating that it's a dance. There's a few more questions here. How to plan for succession if the current generation taking over is the last generation? So, sorry, just to clarify, whoever put that question in, could you comment, is that there's no further successor, there's nobody else after? Is that what they're saying?
Yeah, there's no more heirs.
There's no more heirs. And
Our direct line.
in your direct line, the same way that you did this. It's you're looking for what's best to fit your particular situation. What has worked previously may not work, and so getting clear on what a desired outcome would be. So for example, you may not have a functioning enterprise or business, but you may wish to have transgenerational wealth. So how might this be managed over time? Or if there aren't heirs, what charities might benefit? How might we step away from this? What could that look like? So I think about it as looking through binoculars. Like we see the future and it's kind of foggy, and you're slowly making decisions and educating yourself, and it's focusing the binoculars. That's the goal, is just start and get closer to it. It's hard when it's emotional though, because it's personal and it feels like the end. But how can the business serve your family is the question I have. And if you think about it in reverse, where the family is trying to serve the business, is where you can trip on things. Yes.
Like, is there a place for legacy? Should that even be in the conversation? When you're the last in line?
Is there a place for legacy? Should it be in the conversation when you're the last in line? That's a great question. Should it?
My dream is for it to be.
Yeah. Sometimes dreams change, but simultaneously, maybe there's a way that an impact can happen for years to come in your absence, in terms of community investment, in terms of a non-family transition, which also is a possibility. You get to define that. But when we have to let go of what our dream was, there's grief associated with that. And so we hold on really tight. But that's the nature of change and looking forward at what actually is possible. Got one more? How do you deal with the patriarchal attitude that refuses to respect females? The extreme control impacts farm evolution and success as well as marital success. I do not have a magic wand. Darn it. No, just kidding. One conversation at a time. When there are core beliefs that are unchangeable, this is what is absolutely what they value and what they believe, it is what it is. And so if you are in a situation in which that is immovable, you're immovable. It's not what I would advocate for, but at some point you can say, no, this is not okay. I personally have been at many tables where it was very clear that it was very patriarchal, and so ultimately my opinion is irrelevant. It's what makes sense for that family and what do they believe. But if you're fighting against that, I think a circle of other like-minded individuals in which you are valued is very powerful, no matter what gender you are. And so all you can do is lead by example. And that's honestly the way that I think about a lot of the messaging. Lead from where you are. It doesn't matter what your title is. It doesn't matter where you are in your career. You have this opportunity to be a leader in your behavior, in your language, and the actions that you choose to take. Wow, great questions, you guys.
Yeah, so thank you, Patti, for wonderful presentation and sharing your ideas and thoughts and experience. Well, that's really thought-provoking, emotional, and I think almost everyone in the audience can relate it to themselves in some degrees, especially kind of a little bit older generations trying to find a path through working with or convincing the farm families, the young families, to connect to their businesses. Thank you very much for coming over this year and sharing your thoughts and experience with us. So this is the end of the session here. I would like to request everyone to give us a round of applause for Patti and all the other speakers that have been part of this session.